Are there some people that you look up to? Maybe you're green with envy. You see some, you know, guy who grinds, some billionaire guy, some TikTok influencer that you wish you could be. Well, you're in luck because today's episode, we're going to talk about, well, who did Shakespeare look up to? And this is the Existential Stoic podcast. I'm Randy. That's Danny. What's going on, Danny?
What's up, Randy?
It's an interesting thing. I was thinking about this one day because, like we read a whole bunch of stuff. And like one thing that
Yeah.
I'll read pretty frequently is Marcus Aurelius. And I always wonder, we kind of like put these people on a pedestal. Like nowadays people do it with like I don't even know who they do it nowadays, but back when I was younger, they would do it with like Zuck and Bill Gates and Warren Buffett and all these like guys who are, financially well off and all the epitome of success, and everybody's looking up to them. But you have to wonder, like, who are they actually looking up to? Because there's definitely some they definitely feel inadequate compared with
Yeah.
somebody that they're looking up to.
So who are they like? Yeah, like I mean, yeah, because it's funny because you can look up to somebody in the sense of like a role model, but you can also look up to them in the sense of like a comparison, right? And like,
Hmm.
the role model one's more positive, I think, than the comparison one. But like I
Yeah.
think a lot of us make these comparisons, like, I'm a failure because I didn't invent Facebook when I was however the hell old he was when he invented, created it or whatever.
Hmm.
Like, and it's funny because it's like such a weird way to think. Because it's like you're assuming that like the assumption or the bottom assumption of that is that everything in your lives were fundamentally identical. The only difference was this thing. And it's like that's absolutely patently false, right?
Sure.
Like,
Yeah.
and it's like there was a great I remember there was a I forget who it was now, but he was talking about the guy was saying like, like he's like, I always loved snowboarding. I always looked at these professional snowboarders. He's like, but I grew up in the hot South, not near mountains.
Uh-huh.
He's like, so, when I was younger, he's like, just didn't do it because there wasn't an opportunity to do it. He's like, I started doing it when I got older, obviously, but then you're not going to be a professional because it's like, there's not enough time and like you don't have the energy, whatever. You got other things going on. But like, it's just funny when you think that way because it's like, yeah, he looked up to him, but it's like, it just wasn't possible because of like situational factors that had nothing to do with him, it just
Hmm.
had to do with the world.
Yeah.
Yeah, and chance.
Absolutely. Yeah, I remember when I read Steve Jobs' biography, how it was like, his pa one of his I think his dad was a mechanic, so he
Yeah.
was like very mechanically inclined, but his mom worked for some big tech company and they were in
Yeah.
Silicon Valley like right at the beginning, and he had this computer club that he was the part of, and like
Yeah.
all this stuff lined up that it's like there's almost no way he could not be who he eventually came to
Oh,
be.
dude, him and Gates, if I remember correctly, both of them, like their parents had them enrolled in like this special program within the company for like early
Hmm.
tech stuff or something, like I forget. But like, yeah, they had opportunities and chances, and they were there where most people just didn't. Like, so it makes sense that they were the ones that like somebody else would have if they weren't there, obviously. I think
Hmm.
we would have had a very similar probably trajectory either way, but they happen to be there, and
Which
and I
which
think that's
also
no, sorry. I was just gonna say that's what I hate a lot is that we idolize these people and we put them up on pedestals without realizing that like so much of it is chance and just circumstance. That, yes, I don't want to diminish people's work because people put in a lot of work, but it's also like you still have to have the situation to be present for it to work out, right? And for it to even do anything. So, or for you to even know that's a possibility. Because most kids their age when they were young didn't even know computer stuff was a possibility. Had no
no,
idea what it was. There wasn't
no.
personal computers, it wasn't like a thing you could just do. And so, yeah, I mean, if you think about it, like you have to be in that situation specifically in order to have that reality, happen.
Hmm. Yeah. And I mean, it makes you beg the question, like, what's the big deal? Why does everybody feel like their life needs to be so freaking important?
I don't know.
But I mean,
Yeah.
there's like everybody wants to be famous or rich or something like that. But it's like Marcus Aurelius says after fame comes oblivion. And also kind of like before fame comes oblivion, you get a brief spark. But like you look at all those like child actors or stuff like that who had like a brief moment in the spotlight, like Jonathan Taylor Thomas
Oh
from
God, yeah.
yeah, from
Uh,
Home Improvement. That's it.
yes,
Yeah.
there you go.
Dude,
Dang.
he was like all the rage on every like teen girl
He was
magazine
like a
for
teen
probably like
heartthrob. Yeah.
5 years or something.
Yeah.
But now who's ever heard of him? You know? And he just like, but like, and that's got to be crushing for him because yeah, sure, during those years it was great, but now oblivion for the
Yeah,
rest
you know
of his
what's funny?
life.
I was just thinking about this with the Olympics going on. Like these people, like, they train so hard to do these events and like, and if they're, if they're lucky, win gold, and stuff, that's awesome. But like, that's like, they're most of these people are very young. Like you're talking like what, like I think 16 to like 30 and 30 is old for
Hmm.
Olympians.
Yeah.
And it's like you make this huge achievement at that age, and then it's like, you're on such a high. It's like, what do you do after that? Because it's like there's
Uh,
very few things where like you do something well and you have the pomp and ceremony like the Olympics has. You know what I mean? Like, where people come out with flags and like you
Yeah.
get a medal. Like it's kind of funny when you think about it.
Yeah. I think so. Like, there's one experience that I had in my life where I think I was kind of really lucky to have this experience. It was like for a while, I was on this whole like grind, like business, like success trajectory type of thing. And it was when I was severely in debt. And so I thought that like money was the answer to all of life's questions. Like, I thought
As
this was
most
it.
as most Americans think.
Like everybody's pretty convinced that money will make their life better. And everybody says, money doesn't solve all your problems, and still people are like, yeah, but I'd just like to try. Why not?
For me, it will
Yeah,
for me
for
then.
me. Yeah, like Tobias when him and Lindsay have
Well,
like
it
a
just might work for us.
yeah, exactly. And so uh there was during this time, there was this guy who I followed, and he was worth like $10 million at the time, which to me was like insane money. I mean, this was
Yeah, it's
this was
still a lot
this
of
was
money.
back I mean, this was
Yeah.
back, 10, 15 years ago when $10 million
When 10
dollars
million
was
was a
still
lot
worth a
more.
lot of money.
Now it's like, meh,
Yeah, exactly.
you get like a
And
hamburger.
yeah. Right. And so just by chance, I was at a convention in Dallas, and I was walking around the city, and I ran into him. Okay. And like this, I was completely starstruck, and he clearly didn't want anything to do with me. But but I was like, because this was like he had solved the answer to life. Like, in my perspective, if you have money, everything's awesome in life. He had $10 million, which is a lot of money. And so I was like, dude, what is it like to be rich? And I was like, what does it feel like to be rich? And he's like, feels the same as it did to be broke. And like, literally, my mind just melted. Like, at that
Yeah.
moment, I was just like, dude, you literally have everything I've ever wanted in my entire life that I can remember. And you're saying it's no different than being broke? And he's like, yep. I'm like, well, I guess we're done pursuing that.
It's funny. I think but it makes sense, right? Because it's like it's an error. Like I think everybody makes, especially in this country, is because like you said, you were in debt at the time that you started doing this, like the grind and stuff like that. And like when you're really in debt, like it makes sense to think that money will solve all your problems because on your mind immediately every day is that weight of that debt, right? So it seems like, and it's very easy to think that if I just get money all these problems will go away. But you're forgetting that that's only like the most immediate problem that you're facing. You're not looking at like the rest of like your life, yourself, all these other things that like contribute to it. So like it makes sense to think that, but it's just a false way of thinking, right? It's funny, like I remember in undergrad, like a lot of I don't know why the college I went to, but a lot of wealthy people sent their kids there. So like just a lot of kids who had a ton of money. I don't want to mention anybody's name because I don't want to like, but I know a bunch of them. I was friends with them, and like one thing that was eye-opening to me was like these kids had like, they had credit cards their parents just paid off. Like whatever they bought, it didn't matter. Like if they wanted a new gaming computer, they could go out and just buy like spend 5 grand. It didn't matter, like which I was like, that's amazing, right? Like Jesus, because I've
Hmm.
never had that much money, and it was funny though because like I realized like most of them were actually pretty much all of them were like not mentally well, and like dealing with a lot of things, and it just made me think like, well, maybe that's not it then, like if all these, and like I would talk to them about their family and stuff and like they still had all these problems. It seemed pretty similar to my problems. So it's like maybe that's not it then, it's
Hmm.
interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it brings you back to like all of these people who we idolize. You know, do you think they spend their life kind of being jealous of other people? Are they just stuck in the same rat race, keeping up with the Joneses as everybody else is?
I always wondered that too, because like it's hard to say when you on the real day. Though I think about it now, like, you look at like we'll use the billionaires as an example, I guess, because it almost seems like they get caught in a competition Like we're like, because like they, at a certain point, you've earned enough where like you don't need money. Like your
More
kids
money is
don't
not
need
going to be able
money.
to buy anything. Not going to
Yeah,
contribute to your life, to your family's
nothing.
life, to your any generational,
Yeah,
like it's not going to make
nothing.
it any improvement.
More's not going to make any difference, right? Like, I mean, you already have like, especially when you're talking about now, where these people already have so much, like you couldn't even spend it,
Hmm.
literally. I mean, in a lifetime, even if you tried. And it's like, so what do you do then? And it's like they just now are like in this competition for more. Like they're just hoarding things. And it's like that I think is like more indicative of like a psychological problem than it is of like happiness. And and you realize and none of them are happy. So I think they must be making comparisons against each other, I guess. Like that's how you like, it's like you get
Hmm.
caught up in this game and it's like I'm only winning if I have the most, I guess. I don't know.
Hmm.
Very strange.
Why do you think we do get stuck in these comparisons?
I think because I don't know, maybe because it is we look outside of ourselves so much to understand ourselves. So I
Hmm.
think like like I mean like
Feels
we
good
can
for our
tell.
ego. We
Well,
want to be
not
like,
good or bad, right? I mean, I don't know if it's good or bad. I think it's just a nat like we just like we understand ourselves in part by looking out the world and seeing like what we are like and what we're not like, right? And I think that naturally generates this comparison thing. But then you put on top of that, right, like expectations, culture, and our culture, right, is very individualistic and supposedly meritocracy, right? So like it's based on merit. So it's always like, if you
since when?
fail, yeah, I know, right? That's what they like to say, right? That's why you use scare quotes. But
Yeah.
it's this idea, I think, that like if you're successful or if you're good or if you're, whatever, a great person, you'll do well. And if you're not, you won't. And so it makes sense to make these comparisons, I think, or we start to. And it's just a really bad trap to get caught in because you'll never be happy doing that. There's always people that have better, it's funny because I always wondered too if like these billionaires do like look at other people and like dream about having like a quiet life and like a family and like happy. You know what I mean? Like
Probably.
things that probably, right? Like not being bothered all the time. Think about like, it was in the news recently, like Taylor Swift using her private jet a lot and Elon Musk they're talking about because of the environmental stuff. But it's like at the same is it for them to even go anywhere?
Hmm.
If they're not in their private jet, which I'm sure that makes it easier because you just jump in and go. But like if they had to take a regular plane or drive, like they do, like Taylor Swift is like so famous and has so many fans, like she probably can't do
Plane would never
anything.
board. Yeah, Tom
Yeah.
Segura has a comedy special where he said that like Mike Tyson was on his flight and like boarding took an hour and a half because everybody who passed Mike Tyson in
When I
first
get
class wanted to take a
selfie.
picture with him. Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, and it's like really like, could you imagine that if everything you did, and it's like, and at the same time, you're like rocking a hard place. It's like all those people that like you is also why you are where you are and have the wealth that you have. So it's nice when people are nice about that, but it's like also like they also have a life. So it's like,
Hmm.
you can't do anything then. So it's like, yeah, I always wonder that, like if they, kind of like regret
And
it too, maybe, or,
and they're probably like trapped because they can live in their place in Beverly Hills or whatever, but if they go travel anywhere, they can't go travel to cities and stuff like that because they go to a city and everybody will just like flock around
well,
them,
I
so they
think that's
miss
why
out
you
on
always see
that
a lot
part.
of them have like this entourage of people that like are
Hmm.
basically runners,
Yeah. Yeah.
like to go get stuff. Like, yeah,
Yeah.
it's
Hmm.
really
I remember
interesting.
there was some movie, I know we've talked about this before, it was some movie with Eminem and Ray Romano and they were playing themselves in the movie. And Eminem was like, I can't even go to Walmart. Like, what type of life is this? And it's like, it's crazy because we don't think about that. We just take it for granted being able to go to Walmart and, do our shopping there. Yeah.
And what it's funny too is like most like Eminem's a good example where like when he was younger, he wanted to do this thing, but I doubt in his head he had any conception of how famous he would become, how popular. Like, there's no way he could have known. Like, he might have dreamed about it, but even if he dreamed about it, he didn't know what it would entail. And he was young. He was like,
Hmm.
when he started out, what was he like 16 or 17 or something? Like when he actually started. So it's like you're also too young to even comprehend what this crap means. And by the time you realize it, it's like way too late.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
like every blessing has a burden, but it's hard to see what the burden is. Like the blessing you can see, but it's like with the
Yeah.
associated burden, you have no idea.
Well, I think that's the other problem too, is like, and we talked about this before, I'm sure, but like money is like such an easy comparison thing because it's like because it exists outside of us, right? It's like the value exists. I know what a dollar's worth, even though it keeps changing and keeps getting less, but I know what it's worth, right? And like like if I have a dollar and you have a dollar, like I know they're equivalent, right? So it's easy to make these comparisons like with objects and with wealth. And so I think we tend to focus on that to kind of evaluate how good people are doing, but it's a faulty system because it's one thing and it says nothing about how they're living their lives. Or like, like I remember when Elon Musk purchased Twitter, like he was sleeping in his office, dude, for like I know for like the first month or so that like he was living there. Like, is
Hmm.
that really like,
Yeah,
what most people dream of?
probably
And
not.
like, and the weird part is he doesn't have to. The guy's got plenty. I mean, really, he doesn't have to do anything. He's got plenty of money. Like, I mean,
Hmm.
he has to liquidate, I'm sure, but he's got plenty of money. So like, he really doesn't have to do anything. Yet he's still there. So
Hmm.
that tells you something too about kind of the person he is too. I think, which is like a workaholic.
Yeah.
And
Like another thing that I like interesting corollary is like when we were kids, like, you know, I had like a poster of a Lamborghini Countach, you know? I
yeah,
think it was either red or white, I can't remember, but it was like, and that was like never seen because we grew up in a small town, like
you never saw them.
never
Maybe
saw
once
it.
in a blue
Like
moon. Yeah,
maybe I remember there was this movie called Speed Zone that I would watch over and over again because it had a Lamborghini in it. All right. And so like but then I grew up and lived in places like Miami where you see Lamborghinis every day and they completely lose any appeal whatsoever because it's just like, oh, that's like, there's a Hyundai, there's a Jeep, there's a Lamborghini. It's like it's just
yeah.
another one of these things. And it's just like, wow.
And it's like, and what's funny too is like when you're young, they look so cool. When you get older, you realize it's like, dude, it's like, yeah, I mean, they're neat, but like, you can't even drive them like they're supposed to be driven.
Oh, a
They
speed
cost
bump
a,
will destroy the car.
and not to mention they cost everything on them costs a fortune. So it's like, it's like, is that what you really want your runaround car to be? And tiny? I mean, they're small. They have no trunk. Like, really?
I remember I saw there was so like how sometimes there will be like the change in the pavement when you like go into a place where it'll go from like straight to kind of up. I
Yeah.
saw one supercar, I don't know if it was a Lamborghini or what, but it took like 20 minutes trying to like angle in super slowly so that it wouldn't destroy the whole entire like
And destroy it because
undercar.
like
Yeah.
that will destroy it. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's just like,
God.
wow, that looks fun to drive.
Yeah. That's like the kind of thing too. Like, I mean, like, I guess if you had like the money to build a track or something and you could go,
Hmm.
like, that makes sense to me. But like, otherwise, yeah, why?
Yeah.
Like, you get something else. But yeah, it is funny. But I think this is the other thing. We put this value on exclusivity and stuff too. And it's like, it's just other crap. It's just stuff. That's all it is. It doesn't,
Hmm.
at the end of the day, like, if you need a car, guess what?
Hmm.
Like, a Hyundai is equivalent to a Lamborghini. Actually, it's probably better than a Lamborghini because
Hmm.
you can drive it normally. You're not a cop magnet
You can wrap it
and you
around a
can put
tree and
stuff
not
in
feel
it.
terrible.
Yeah. You can hit a speed bump and who cares? Like, kind of thing. Like, oh God.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, we're all gonna die. And it's all just like all this stuff that you work
I
for
used
is
to love
just
that about
gone.
when you read about the pharaohs where like they get buried with all this stuff.
Yeah.
And it's like, like that's coming with me. That's mine. But it's
Yeah.
like, you can't take it with you. It's it. So it's like, why do we bother? But it's
Hmm.
so, and now I think it's got to be worse now than ever too, I think, because we're constantly forced to look at all this, like we're constantly forced to look at all the famous people, all the, we're constantly reporting on all this stuff. And it's like, it's so hard to get a clear evaluation, I guess, because we don't really have like a community where that's like what you're comparing. As we talked about this before, but like, in the past, like you live in a small town, one, it was hard to go places. So like you're basically comparing yourself to a bunch of people in literally the exact same situation.
Hmm.
Like one house might have a little nicer this or whatever, but basically they're the same. So it must have been a lot easier to feel comfortable with what you were doing and the way you were living than like it is now where there's so many examples of just like the extreme, because that's all we ever see is the extreme. We see
Hmm.
the extreme worst and the extreme high, and we don't ever see the middle.
Dude, everybody's trying to live their best life and be all that they can be and all these
I
things. And
swear to
it's
God,
just
if I hear
like,
somebody else say that, dude, I
yeah,
getting so annoyed by that
it's
phrase.
ridiculous. It's ridiculous. But it's like, being average is pretty normal. Like, 98% of people are going to be average. There's the top 1% and the bottom 1%, but everybody else is just going to be average. And it's just like,
In the
okay,
middle,
fine.
yeah,
Yeah.
somewhere in the middle, yeah,
Hmm.
yeah. It is
So,
interesting though when you think about that. Yeah,
yeah, so I guess no matter where you are on the spectrum of things, there will always be other people to look up to. You're always going to be jealous and try and keep up with the Joneses, but hey, that's just part of life. So,
it
this
is.
is,
I think, compare to yourself. That's the
hmm
best way, I think. It
Oh
is.
yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
Like comparing with yourself historically, like yourself 5 years ago or 10 years ago. That's a pretty
Dude,
good
ever since
comparison.
it's the best way to do it, I think. It makes you feel the best because you see real actual growth and you also know all the context. There's no
Hmm
it's not like you're making crap up, and like pretending. You know it. So it's much easier to make a real comparison.
Absolutely. So you've done it again. You've made it to the end of another excellent episode of the Existential Stoic podcast. Until next time, I'm Randy. That's Danny. I'll see you later, Danny.
Later, Andy.